Hi everyone, in this video we're going to look at how you can pace a marathon. Now there are loads of different strategies and there's a lot of talk about how negative splitting is the best way to go. Some people are saying that that's almost impossible, and it really depends on your kind of perspective, especially for new marathon runners. It's unlikely to get a negative split. I wouldn't necessarily always agree with that, but I think that's the kind of message that's often kind of put out there is, the kind of old saying which kind of annoys me a little bit is you always hear with the BBC in particular is, start slow, get slower. I don't think that necessarily needs to be the case. There are loads of ways to run a marathon, and it really depends on your own circumstances, and there are loads of factors that can come into that as well. So, first off, the negative split is running the second half quicker than the first half, or certainly seeing a progression in your pace, even pacing being roughly even pace across the whole marathon, and a positive split being a slower second half than in the first half. That's where most people end up. I would say a lot of the time, not always, it's down to not necessarily fueling well enough, not hydrating well enough, misjudgment of pace on the course and getting kind of caught up in the excitement of it all, or just not knowing actually what your pace should be. There are loads of different reasons it can happen, and you can just have a bad day. It's one of those things, 26 miles, there's a long time to be out there, and a lot can change in that time frame. Even if you're in the best possible shape, something can just go slightly awry, something happens and you don't quite make it in that day. So I wouldn't get too kind of worried about that. The thing I often see most people get wrong with this, if they kind of go out very hard at the start, and it's the idea of, I need to bank some time. The time is irrelevant in that respect, because your energy levels and how you can maintain your current pace, your current effort, your heart rate, and the build-up of lactate and byproducts in the body is more important, and the muscle damage. So really what I would say is bank energy, not time. So you are going to get tired towards the end anyway, so you might as well save some energy in those early stages. Feed off the crowd, feed off being in a group, and then as the race starts to thin out towards the latter stages, that's when you really need that energy that you've saved in the first part of the race, or certainly a part of the race towards the beginning. So bank energy, not time, is the key takeaway I always think of. The other thing with the pacing of every marathon, you need to think about the course conditions, where the wind's going to be coming from, how strong they're going to be, how much they're going to affect your race, and also things like the elevation. So if your second half of your marathon is really, really hilly, that makes it really hard to do a negative split. So why try? Know that you're probably going to run a positive split. Even if you run with the same effort level, or even an increase in effort level, you may well still positive split. So it becomes less about having a strategy as looking at it as a completely clinical thing. It doesn't necessarily always work that way. There will be changes. There will be slower miles, there'll be faster miles, and it's the right thing for you and for the course and conditions importantly as well. So what I would say is more about pace versus effort. So we think of negative splitting or positive splitting, pacing a marathon as a number. Yes, there is an element of that. There has to be an element of that, and we should be working within a certain range for those numbers. Obviously, hilly miles will slow down. Downhill miles we should ideally speed up a little bit, but we should have certainly a range most of the time, no more than 15, 20 seconds per mile between your fastest pace and your slowest pace. That's generally going to work pretty well for most of us. That said, there are exceptions, obviously on particularly hilly courses, very hot courses, very windy courses, so there are other things, but for most of us, that's going to do the trick. So, working with those types of things, and then also the effort level. So, for instance, I did the UK Boston Marathon in 2021. Really lovely day, actually quite nice conditions, got warm towards the end, but otherwise there wasn't a lot of wind to speak of, and it's around about 70 feet of elevation across the entire thing, so very flat, very, very predictable. Although my pace roughly was about the same. There's a pretty much an even split down to about 15 seconds between the first half and the second half. I certainly tried a lot harder in that second half. Twice I tried to push on and try and bring the pace up, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't sustain that certainly at a comfortable, manageable, I couldn't maintain that at a manageable level that felt realistic that I could keep on going. So even though my pace averaged around about 6:04, it was pretty consistent throughout that marathon. There was certainly a really big increase in the amount of effort level, and you can see that from the heart rate creeping up, and obviously the muscles getting more and more tired. I fueled well, I paced it quite nicely, managed that effort level nicely, but it was still a big kind of effort towards the end there. So even though I banked some energy, it was still tough. And if I'd gone for a negative split, I'd have run slow the first half and maybe would have had something in to put in the finish, but I doubt it, because having run a sensible, realistic pace on previous runs, I couldn't pick it up. So that can happen, but it depends on how well you've paced it and how well you've picked up other projections of your time. So this is the other side of it as well. So you want to make sure that you are setting a realistic expectation in the first place. So having run a half marathon or 20 miler in either similar conditions or harder conditions, and course, the course conditions themselves, but actually the elevation, and being able to then compare and project ahead realistically to your marathon. So if you run a flat marathon, flat half marathon, you're going up to a hilly marathon, you need to kind of take that with a pinch of salt and add on probably quite a lot of extra time aside from just the projection of that half marathon time of the marathon. If equally though you've run a really hilly marathon, a half marathon, sorry, and you're going through a flat marathon, equally you can go, right, I could probably whack 5 to 10 seconds per mile off of that and run that same sort of pacing strategy or something along those lines. There are lots of bits of information, but it's not as black and white. It's just negative, positive, or even pacing, and it's not a completely clinical. You have to factor in all the context around it. So how you pace your marathon should be based on your fitness, your mentality, your fueling strategy, the course conditions, and actually the course itself. So it isn't a case of whether you always run a positive split or always run a negative split. There are loads of ways to do it. You can also, if you are running a negative split or progression of pace, you can time it differently throughout that race. You might go for the first 30 miles and then next 6, and then top on the next 4 and then 3. You could go very clear 16 and 10. So I did my first marathon, 16 miles. It was around 6:35 pace, 6:40 pace. Second 10, leading much more towards 6:20, 6:25, and some 6:30. So you can pace it very differently, and that was on my first one. I didn't know what I was doing, so although it was a great negative split, technically speaking on paper, clearly I undersold myself by going that much of a negative split. So I didn't do enough in the first half. There's loads of ways to think to do, but basically you want to factor in all these different things, and those will be the determining factors. This is where, again, the advice of a coach, having someone experienced around you, whether it be a friend or coach, to guide you through this process. But really think about all those different factors. Don't just go, oh, I'm going to definitely negative split, I'm going to definitely try and positive split. Positive splits are tough, they're doable, and certainly to get you most out of yourself, you want to be probably leaning towards an even pace or something very slight positive split. So you are emptying your tank, and if you feel great, you can then push on and maintain for a more even pace at that higher pace, or a faster pace than you maybe expected. But depends what you want to get from the marathon. So loads of factors to consider essentially. I don't want to keep on going too long on this video. So if you've got any questions on this stuff, let me know and I'll get back to you.